This is what the Aladdin Hotel Casino used to look like. By the time I got here in the 1980s, it was already considered a bad luck joint. Had a bad location, etc., etc., etc. It proved to also be bad luck for Elvis's marriage. Like most Vegas marriages, it's built on weak and shifting sand. So our story today is about Elvis getting married at the Aladdin, 1967. So back then, like most all the Vegas casinos, they had strawman owners on paper. But the true owners of the Aladdin were Detroit gamblers. Some of them were like Bedouin type people from Syria, most of them born and raised in Detroit, but had a Syrian bloodline. They got along well with the Detroit Italian mafia. So now we know why it was named the Aladdin. So one quick gambling story before we get to the Elvis story. The dice pit. There was a tradition that started at the Aladdin. It was probably the late 60s or early 70s. And the tradition in the dice pit, see, back in the day, the dice tables had a crew of dice dealers. You had 4 dealers that worked each table, and they went table for table, meaning whatever they made in that 8-hour shift, those 4 crap dealers kept it, and they split it up between each other. It's called table for table. Same thing on the blackjack tables. You worked for yourself. That's when the dealers really knew what they were doing, and the dealers were pleasant to the customers. Everything has changed now. But let's go back to a tradition that started at the Aladdin and then spread to all the other casinos in Vegas. You see, back then, dice was a big popular game, and in the dice pit, they had many tables. There might be 10, 15 tables. Many of them were ramming and jamming, some of them weren't. But you had a main dice game. That's the one that got started early. That was called the main game, and then it spread out from there. The main game was where all the action was. Now, of course, the tradition was of giving kickbacks to the Detroit guy. See, there was a Detroit guy who had just gotten back from the Vietnam War, and he came to work in the crap pit, and his elder senior family members were running the pit, but they didn't take kickbacks then from the dice dealers. But this guy had just got back from Vietnam, and he came up with this great idea. Why don't we get the best dice crew to give us kickbacks, and they will get on the main game? And then it led to a tradition where the crews, how much money the crews gave the Detroit guy depended on where and what table they were assigned. So if you didn't give much, you were on one of the outer tables and you didn't get much action. So this was a tradition that went on probably up until the early 80s. So how do I know this? Well, I work with the guy. I'm an ex-dice dealer. So let's get to the main story. The Elvis Presley marriage. May 1st, 1967. As we said, at the Aladdin Hotel. It was an intimate ceremony. After the ceremony, there was a champagne breakfast for about 100 people. Now, most of the wedding guests used the rear entrance when they came into the casino to avoid publicity. Nevada Supreme Court Judge David Zenoff, he officiated the ceremony. There was only about 14 people there watching. It was very quick, intimate ceremony. Just Elvis's closest people were around him. There was no big Hollywood. It was no big Hollywood circus. I mean, that was not Elvis's style. Joe Esposito and Marty Lacker were the best men. And here's a strange story. Red West was invited to the wedding. Elvis apparently invited Red, but strangely, Red West was turned away when he got there. Maybe that had something to do with Colonel Parker, but there was some bad blood going on there. After that, I mean, some feelings were hurt. Red West was not the only one that was turned away. I believe Red West even quit Elvis for a little bit there. After the ceremony, Elvis went to Palm Springs for the honeymoon. And now we're going to get to a story that you might not have seen before. It comes from an old vintage Hollywood type magazine. They used to talk about gossip and everything, but sometimes the stories were correct. And anytime I find an old vintage article like this, I'll try to share the story with you. So here it comes. The story is from Screen Stories, Gossip TV. It's 1967, August. So this is just a few months after Elvis got married. And let's see if we can find anything new, some news stories in here. I found one part of the article that might not be correct. Remember, not everything you read is correct, but let's find the article. This is a funny advertisement with the Jerry Lewis movie. I mean, who's that? I think that girl there is called Susan Bay. Very pretty Susan Bay. So, like I said, August 1967. The story's on page 26. So let's go ahead and find the story. Here we are. How did she get him to marry her? This is what everyone is asking about. The pretty, dark-haired young girl who finally got the world's most eligible and elusive bachelor to the altar. Elvis Presley had many reasons to dodge marriage, like $100 million worth of reasons, as one Hollywood observer put it. He's good for over $6 million a year, and it was risking the wrath of his teenage fans to tie himself in on a marriage to one girl. So how did Priscilla do it? Girls have been throwing themselves at Elvis for many, many years. Not only the teenage fans who write him love letters and try to storm the gates of his homes in California and Tennessee, but also scores of Hollywood's most exciting young actresses. So that's the first page, and now we go on to the next page where it has a little bit more information. And let's read part of this and see if we can't find some new information for all the Elvis fans out there. I know most of you are everybody's an Elvis fan. Okay, 21-year-old girl with a dimpled smile. But it wasn't her beauty and youth alone, because Elvis has always had his pick. Priscilla won out where 10 million other girls failed because Elvis believed that Priscilla loved him for himself and not his money. You see, that was a major problem with Elvis. He got famous so quickly that he never trusted these people. I mean, did they really love him for who he was or because he was famous and rich? And this aided Elvis. So anyhow, the story says that this is how Priscilla won him over. Let's go on and let's see what we have. Originally, Elvis had planned to marry in Palm Springs so that they could have a lovely wedding on a Sunday morning in the desert and having a wedding breakfast in a private room of a country club which looked over the brilliant purple mountains. But when they arrived that weekend, he was appalled to learn that through a news leak, hordes of reporters and TV cameramen were staked out. He ordered a plane chartered and told Priscilla that at 3 in the morning they would slip out of Palm Springs and fly to Las Vegas, where they could elude everybody. Now, here's where the story might not be correct, or it could be. This is where I'm going to ask a little help from all the Elvis experts out there. I think we still have a few left that know the true story. In this article, it says, an intriguing note was added when Danny Kaye, everybody knows who Danny Kaye was. He was a famous actor. And it says here that Danny Kaye, who was in Palm Springs at the time and is a flying nut, offered to fly them in his plane. Elvis accepted, and he and Priscilla were whisked off to Las Vegas in the plane piloted by Danny. Now that may be true, and it may not be, but here's something I had heard that may change everything. We know that Elvis chartered a second plane, but what we also have heard through history that Frank Sinatra loaned Elvis his private jet for the occasion. So this is kind of a strange part of the story, and if anybody had, maybe they're both true. Maybe Danny Kaye offered to fly them to Las Vegas in his private jet, and then when they got there, maybe Frank Sinatra loaned Elvis his private jet. So if there's anybody out there who knows the true story, leave a comment. Now we know for sure that the plane that Elvis chartered was for all the wedding guests. So okay, let's see what the article goes on to talk about all of Elvis's girls, and the most outstanding of all his romances was Margret. She was obviously my favorite. I think everybody thinks that he should have picked Margret, but according to the story here, Margret criticized his flashy clothes and tried to tell him how to dress, and she insisted that they go out and not stay in the house, and basically she was too dominant for Elvis's taste. So unfortunately, Margret lost out to Priscilla, and that's in the story. So when Elvis would come to Hollywood to make a film, he sometimes brought Priscilla with him, and sometimes he did not. But when she did come along, she kept to herself, hidden, never going anywhere, never visiting Elvis on the set, and listening to Elvis give the studio publicist instructions that they were not to mention that she was even in town. If she was hurt by this, she never let Elvis know. This was probably all because, again, they did not want to piss off all of Elvis's fans, the girls. All the fans needed to know that Elvis was available to them. It was like some sort of fantasy going on there. So the article goes on to say it was shortly after his 30th birthday, a year ago last January, that Elvis realized he might be cheating himself out on what he wanted the most out of his life: marriage and children. So it all happened when he turned 30. Like a lot of women today, when they get to be 30, they start thinking about, hey, maybe it's time to have children. And the rest is history.